Alrighty, we're gonna get started here. I had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're gonna go
Attending a
with
Christmas party.
Autistic
Do you
AF.
hate?
This is Autistic AF. I know he lives on an island somewhere. I think it's north of Scotland, but I'm guessing. Um, but he is autistic, and he's going to tell us a little bit about PDA and discuss a little bit, and then I'll throw in my bias comments.
Being told what to do. Hate being told what to do. Even if it's an ordinary, straightforward request. Maybe even in your own interests. Then you might have PDA. What's PDA? Well,
Pathological demand avoidance.
hey friends, I'm Mike, a late diagnosed autistic adult, and today we're going to talk about PDA, or Pathological Demand Avoidance Syndrome. Now, this is a phrase coined by the British psychologist Elizabeth Newton in the 1980s. And PDA was first mentioned in her paper, Pathological Demand Avoidance Syndrome, a necessary distinction within the pervasive developmental disorders, and that was in 2003. PDA, like most autism topics, was used by parents of autistic children informally throughout the 1990s. So, like most things, PDA is described pathologically. Now, a lot of it uses holistic or non-autistic language to describe the behaviour of children on the spectrum who avoid demands. Now, I started this channel to provide helpful resources and community for adults, and I will state my sources, just like I did earlier. So if you disagree or have any points to clarify or disagree with me on, please do likewise and provide your sources. Your experiences don't need references, so please feel free to share them in the comments below. What is PDA? Now, PDA is not currently recognised in the DSM-5. Now, that's the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
No, nor is it recognized in the ACD-10, which is, or excuse me, 11, ACD, ICD-11, that's for Europe, and the DSM-5-TR is for the United States.
Of mental disorders. Their words, not mine, which is a widely used diagnostic tool in the United States and is referenced worldwide. It also isn't recognised or listed in the ICD-11, which is a similar manual published by the World Health Organization. Now, it's worth pointing out now that just because something is not currently recognised, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Now, autism was first identified and diagnosed by the psychiatrist Leo Kanner in 1943. That doesn't mean that nobody was autistic before the 1940s. It's fair to say that autistic people have always been part of the human population. Famous historical people's autistic traits are in the historical accounts. Let me know if you'd like to see speculating on which famous historical people could be hidden autists in a topic for another video. The interest in PDA has been steadily growing over time.
There's tons of inventors and so forth that were
little bumps in interest.
Definitely autistic. I don't know about PDA.
On the 15th of May 2015. And the next spike in interest was when the PDA Society published its guide, the first of its type, describing PDA in 2021. So,
now I was diagnosed in 2020, so all of this is developing as I'm learning and discovering about autism. And I don't think I really discovered PDA until 2023, which, I mean, that's last year, so that's really recent.
PDA isn't officially recognised, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a useful label for a set of behaviours. But what exactly is it? Now, nobody likes being told what to do they? So let's break this apart. In a nutshell, PDA is the label given to those who irrationally avoid even the most routine demands, or suffer rising anxiety due to them. PDA profile is considered separate to, but distinct from autism on the autism spectrum. PDA is a somewhat controversial, not universally accepted anxiety disorder condition, and it's possible to have a professional psychologist or psychiatrist indicate PDA profile on your diagnostic paperwork, but PDA is not clinically recognised.
Right, it's not a diagnosis.
Wait, I am so confused.
Are you confused yet? Firstly, please don't shoot the messenger. I don't like these terms. I get really frustrated sometimes when I read the experiences written online from, say, I'm going to say it, the parents of autistic children. No offence, there's some great parents of autistic children in this community, but when we have allistic people talking about autistic people, we tend to get some very othering language, and that's what we tend to see in things like PDA. Now, the origins from Newton's paper, adopted for around 20 years informally by the parents of demand-avoidant children or teenagers, eventually grows up itself and becomes the charity, the PDA Society. Now, they're not bad. This is not an Autism Speaks situation here, but they're new, and PDA isn't currently formally accepted, and their roots are from the outside looking in.
You cannot stand outside looking in.
Okay, hope that's clear. So,
pathological rejection of authority.
what do we think of when we talk about pathological? Liars, obviously. Now, they can't help it. Like a Tourette's tic, they're constantly making up stories or lying about something or another. They just can't help it. It's like an addict fighting an addiction. Chronic kleptomania. These are people who are compelled, like their behaviours are akin to being driven by a motor, but to steal from shops, often random weird items. We're not talking Ocean's 11 here. It's not just liars and thieves, but it could be OCD too that can be described as pathological. Some PDAers prefer the label pathological as it explains the all-encompassing nature of PDA for some PDAers. The key point here is that it's pathological. Demands
That means that you cannot help it. It is what it is. It
not just drill sergeants shouting at newly enlisted soldiers. Demands can be requests or questions. They can be direct or they can be indirect, such as, meeting the expectations of others. There can be demands within demands. Making a to-do list is a demand, then prioritising it, that's a demand, and then starting to work on the first task, that's also a demand. And daily life gives us all relentless demands, like the need to sleep, eat, keeping up with personal hygiene, getting dressed and so on. There are even positive demands, like spending time with our hobbies or passion projects, or spending time with friends. Now, these are all demands defined under the umbrella of pathological demand avoidance. Making a choice on a menu, that could be seen as a demand too. Can you think of any others? Comment section below, not a demand. You know what I mean. Demand avoidance involves not being able to do certain things at certain times, either for yourself or for others. And it also refers to the things we do in order to avoid demands, states the PDA Society. It makes a point to say that this is a natural human behaviour, something that we all do. The following 3 traits are suggested by the PDA Society as traits of PDA. The first one is that many normal, everyday demands are avoided simply because they've been identified as a demand, and therefore a feeling of a lack of control and anxiety increases. I can relate to this, I'm sure you can too. Number 2, that the demand anxiety is irrational. And the example is given of a seemingly dramatic reaction to a tiny request, or this example, the feeling of hunger inexplicably stopping you from being able to eat. And the third point here is that the avoidance can vary. Now this is a little DSM-like. Similar to the autistic criteria C in DSM-5, traits must be present in childhood. The PDA Society state that traits are involuntary and lifelong. The traits of a PDAer. The PDA Society gives us further the following traits to look out for. 1. Resisting and avoiding the ordinary demands of life. This includes attending appointments, I'm really bad at this, through to everyday activities like washing.
And ADHD has a lot to do with this too.
Dressing and using the bathroom. 2. Using social strategy.
It's really weird that he mentions dressing and using the bathroom, but those are demands, and a lot of times, like, I will be so busy, so concentrating on something that I don't want to go to the bathroom. I will tell you that that is a very bad idea. About 2 months ago, my my sister-in-law passed away because she did not know that she needed to go to the bathroom, and so she got backed up. She was 56, and she ended up, her bowels died because she wasn't going to the bathroom regularly, and she passed.
As part of the avoidance. So distractions or giving excuses, my legs don't work, is one of the examples that they state. Refusal or threats or entering into roleplay. 3. Sometimes a PDAer might self-sabotage or make very elaborate excuses for not being able to do something that perhaps they originally wanted to. appearing sociable on the surface, but lacking depth in understanding, experiencing excessive mood swings and impulsivity.
Now, I found that I was able to. People would ask me why I do weird autistic things. Now, it wasn't ever presented in that context, but I learned to make up excuses for my autism, for my autistic traits. I didn't know. I was making up bullshit. Just grabbing at straws, trying to figure out why the hell I was doing stuff. But I figured out how to justify my behaviors.
Obsessive behaviour, often focused on other people. And this one's optional. Appears comfortable in roleplay and pretend, sometimes to an extreme extent. These items to me seem to be sufficiently vague statements, almost
They are
like a
vague.
horoscope that can be interpreted to fit nearly anyone on the spectrum of humanity, yet alone on the autistic spectrum. This may also account for why the current model of PDA is not yet at a clinical standard, and perhaps ongoing discussion and debate might get it over the line. This model represents the behaviours that might be shown resulting from increased demand load. As far as I can see, this is a very general model of human anxiety, which extends to neurotypical behaviour too. You could push anyone, actually, up this pyramid of avoidance. Everybody procrastinates and makes excuses, so is everyone a little bit PDA from time to time?
No.
Now, I could argue that I'm a PDA. I can think of many examples of PDA traits in my own life that would fit. However,
Nope.
I don't believe that PDA profile helps.
Okay, it is. It's incessant. It stops you from being able to live normally, a normal life. So it is extremely severe. It is not a minor thing whatsoever. And I don't think he's trying to suggest that. He's just trying to explain it.
Provide any explanatory power, at least on its own. And what interventions work for PDAs is unclear. In the paper examining the relationship between anxiety and pathological demand avoidance in adults, a mixed methods approach, a total of 307 adult participants, and this was a non-clinical study, it showed that anxiety and intolerance of uncertainty were both significant predictors of PDA behaviour in adults.
I would say uncertainty is one of the bigger ones.
They found that 37% of the variance of the first part of the study, which was due to age, anxiety, and intolerance of uncertainty. These factors are important, but they don't explain all the variance between those with PDA and those without. So, mindfulness techniques, and I paraphrase, getting used to uncertainty is the takeaway. No need to watch the whole thing. If your PDA profile and came to this video looking for a solution, there you go. The problem with PDA. According to the PDA Society, PDA traits overlap or share clinical features with other presentations and is sometimes misdiagnosed as oppositional defiant disorder, ODD, conduct disorder, CD, reactive attachment disorder, RAD, personality disorders or developmental trauma. The problem with PDA stems from the fact that it will always be misdiagnosed simply because PDA cannot currently be diagnosed. Perhaps when the DSM-6 drops, or maybe not. The final part of my autism assessment was clearly intended to separate out other factors that could be possible explanations for my autistic traits. My avoidance of certain things, indoor parties, intense social engagements, the ringing of a telephone, these all seem perfectly rational to me, not pathological at all.
Right.
But while others will put up with busy social events or unplanned telephone calls, and may even be recharged by them, I find myself drained. I even employ a telephone answering service to answer my phone for me.
Oh my
and
word!
To tell people on my behalf that I won't be calling them back. Now, some of my routines might look a little like OCD, but I'm not doing them out of an awareness of some terrible doom that might happen if I don't. If I give in to the dark side, other people's demands and wishes, and comply for too long, I'll end up burnt out. Not depressed, really, but with my own abilities degraded. And I will make another video.
And it can be described or pathologized as a depression or what have you, but it's not.
Video on autistic burnout, as I think it's important. Like this video and subscribe and stim the notification bell if you'd like to see it. In this context, avoiding demands is perfectly rational. The anxiety might not be, and for me, I feel like PDA as it stands provides less explanatory power then monotropism, and of course my own autistic identification diagnosis. And counting my privilege for a moment, I'm at the point in my life that I can set my own work environment and choose to opt in or out of social engagements. Most external demands aren't mandatory. Although, I do still have an unfiled tax return to submit today, so as soon as the video's done, I'm going to get on with that. Maybe. For those
Hopefully.
autistics who find themselves constantly battling up against parents or teachers or bosses or even partners, and you've considered that you might be a PDAer, I'd like to suggest that the problem might not entirely be on you. Potentially the PDA label could be harmful and not have explanatory power in the same way that, for me, sharing my autism identification does. And maybe sharing a link to my first video on this channel.
No. Oh, hell no, dude. Okay, I'm sorry. You were... From my experience in the United States, what you're saying is no, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I do still have an unfiled tax return to submit today, so as soon as the video's done, I'm going to get on with that. Maybe. For those autistics who find themselves constantly battling up against parents or teachers or bosses or even partners, and you've considered that you might be a PDAer, I'd like to suggest that the problem might not entirely be on you. Potentially the PDA label could be harmful and not have explanatory power in the same way that, for me, sharing my...
Most people don't care enough to bother to pay attention to the label for it to be negative. Most people don't even freaking bother. So I would disagree with this in that respect, that the PDA quote label doesn't do a damn thing. Now, if I was to just go up randomly and say I'm pathological demand avoidant to somebody on the street, they're just going to think I'm pathological and that I'm crazy and not trustworthy, with that word pathological thrown in there. But normally when you go out in town, you don't announce that you're PDA autistic, and even if you did, nobody would know what PDA autistic is, so it doesn't really matter. Well, come on, queue up. I know I've got decent internet.
Autism identification does. And maybe sharing a link to my first video on this channel on monotropism too. Now, Newson's 2003 paper describes a group of children who did not fit with the stereotypical presentation of autism that was recognised at the time. It talks about able autism and Asperger's syndrome, both of which are terms that have fallen out of clinical use. Newson argues that the persistent and marked resistance to demands justifies a new diagnostic identification. Now, come back with me in time. This is coming from the era of the DSM-3.
Same old shit, different day.
So much has changed in the psychiatric and psychological sciences since then, with updated and more useful diagnostic criteria. So the need for PDA as a separate diagnostic condition could in fact be outdated. PDA is subject to ongoing debate and discussion in both professional and community groups, and it is used by some professionals. It could just be a matter of evolving recognition and understanding, and not of it being outdated, but I wanted to give you the context. I asked my psychologist about PDA. She said that one example of avoidant behaviour that psychologists may look for is the cancellation of events like family Christmas gatherings or social events. Now, that was me this Christmas, but it doesn't take a neurotypical to know that these events, even
are stressful.
Like the normal demands of these, are just absolute hotspots of obligations and sensory issues. So I asked the autistic AFTRS community whether or not you cancelled any arrangements over the holidays too.
Okay, this is weird. Okay, there we go.
Half of you chose the "I'm not clicking this, you can't make me," so thanks for that. All the responses at the time of publishing this video, they are not pathological, they're not irrational, I mean, to my mind at least. They are rational. Even if the outcome might appear to others who don't know your reasons to be irrational or strange, that I think is the key point. The pathological P in PDA, combined with the irrational part of the demand avoidance definition, is only where the demand avoidance seems irrational to others. Why did you cancel? We're all having a brilliant time. Yeah, I don't know why I cancelled them either. Sarcasm. I think it's possible that PDA could be suffering from that early research culture that autism did in its early years too. That is to say, it is othering. The definitions and literature largely relate to answer the question, why are these autistic adjacent children persistently refusing requests made of them? It's irrational and we need to understand why. PDA can also be summarised as an irrational need to refuse requests. And I don't speak for
an irrational need to refuse requests. No, I don't think so.
Autistic people. I wouldn't dare, and of course I can't. But I think it's fair to say that as autistic people, we all do avoid demands to one degree or another.
Right.
But more than neurotypicals.
But
The
when it
etymology
becomes
of the word autism comes from the Greek
when it becomes life altering, that's where the problem is.
word autos, which means self, characterised by social and communication difficulties, no doubt, areas of demand avoidance for autistic people, and sensory overstimulation, more demand avoidance potential. Let's think about verbal requests at work. Your manager asks you if you can do something, and this thing is unexpected. To a neurotypical, someone with polytropic focus, see the first video on my channel for more on this may not be a problem. A quick request with a prompt answer. But to an autistic person who needs longer processing time, particularly for verbal or in-person communication, it may appear to the requester that the autist is prevaricating or delaying or thinking up excuses. I mean, it's a simple request. Why can't you just say yes or no? What if you as an autistic person have been given a request that you estimate might consume more of, let's call it spoons, than you'd planned for the day? Spoons, by the way, is a handy measure of units of energy.
I like rusty spoons.
Around half of all autists struggle with some degree of alexithymia. For more personal things, it can be difficult since identifying
And my son lost his life from alexithymia.
correctly responding to emotions and feelings, this could make the response more complex. And beyond just autism, other neurological conditions can cross over and add complexity as to the reasons for demand avoidance, like still rational reasons, in my opinion. It's clear how people in the RSD, that's rejection-sensitive dysphoria camp, might avoid demands. The overwhelming negative emotional attack that's
But
felt
that's different.
by perceived rejection, that might be a clue. Still, there's a rational explanation there for demand
Right.
avoidance. Those with PTSD might also avoid certain stimuli.
And there's
that's
a
before we
rational
get to
reason for
comorbid
it.
mental health issues such as depression or social anxiety disorders. And what about motor difficulties, dyspraxia or dyslexia dyscalculia that may discourage someone from starting and finishing a task? I know when I was at school, having to complete essays in fountain pen was a huge problem for me. It felt like a wall. I wasn't allowed to use a computer or a keyboard. That was too easy, the teacher said. The demand to complete homework the way they wanted it done was unbearable to me. Then there's the effect of getting older, particularly on, say, fawning. I am way less fawny as I've aged. When I was a child, my parents told me to always follow instructions and do what I was told. Parents watching, this is a horrendous thing to tell an undiagnosed autistic child. And since they're undiagnosed, you have no idea what children will take things literally to heart as a rule and which ones won't.
Yep.
Today, I'm much more inclined to protect my mental state and my time and say than to people please than I was in my 20s and 30s. So, if I was born PDA profile, I'm less PDA
Yeah, we tend to be people pleasers because we're trying to figure out and navigate life, basically.
profile as I've gotten older. Doesn't make sense. But if anything, I'm just as autistic. Maybe I simply have better methods for coping with demands. Or maybe I have better methods for avoiding them entirely. Just in a more socially acceptable way, maybe. Let me offer 3 examples that meet the criteria for PDA profile, but have, in my opinion, a better, healthier explanation. Alternative explanation number 1, the double empathy problem. Sometimes demands are explicit, and they're made in a confusing way. Could you do the dishes? Is a demand that isn't actually clear. Oh, you mean sack the dishwasher? What about putting them away afterwards? How about in a work scenario? Could you handle this customer, please? Sorry, what do you mean handle? What would you like to do with them? Now or later? Such questions can be seen as prevaricating. And prevarication is a trait of PDA. The double empathy problem, proposed by autistic researcher Dr. Daniel Miltman in 2012, challenges the traditional view that social difficulties in autism are solely down to the autistic individual's defects. I want you to know that at the time of the Double Empathy Problems 2012 paper, pathological demand avoidance had already been discussed for 30 years already.
But Simon Baron Cohen has picked up on that, and he made the double empathy problem into something that it's not, and really twisted it, and is basically a piece of shit. Did I say that aloud? I need to do an entire series on Simon Baron Cohen, I think.
Kind of which we know in the scientific literature. We now know that there is mutual misunderstanding that can arise as a result of mismatched, is what I wanted to say, emotional experience and expressions between autistic and non-autistic people. These difficulties are bidirectional and can occur in all social interactions. These difficulties must surely be markedly more pronounced for those who are non-speaking too. I've got many stories from schoolwork and home where someone got frustrated with me and acted as though I was trying to dodge what they must have thought were perfectly reasonable requests. They might call it demand avoidance, where this was clearly just a double empathy problem at play. Alternative explanation 2. What if you were asked to do something against your values or morals? For instance, for me as a vegan, I wouldn't participate in animal slaughter for food, no matter how nicely I was asked to. This again could be seen as demand avoidance. I mean, it literally is demand avoidance. I'm not complying with that demand. This is a personal belief, and you may have different beliefs. Think of something that you could countenance and imagine yourself saying no. Or even failing, maybe falling and feeling the anxiety rise. That's not a good place to be, and it is fair enough to say no. What about those people during the World Wars who refused to go and fight and spent their time in prison instead of the front lines? They were called traitors at the time. Now we call them conscientious objectors. They were very reasonably, conscientiously demand avoidant. Alternative explanation 3. When I was a child, my parents would try to make me wear woolen sweaters. You know the ones, the really scratchy fibres that itched your skin when you moved and tickled you when you sort of sat still. That sort of jumper would put my senses on fire right up until a meltdown, or sometimes they called it a tantrum, where I was just being silly and rude. My parents simply knew that I had to wear a warm sweater or I would catch a cold. From their perspective, they were being reasonable. So I would wear it, leave the house in it, rip it off, hide it in a hedgerow path, so fast before you could even say the word pathological. I wanted to make a video that might challenge the prevailing narrative of the PDA profile, and I'm not trying to convince anyone that they aren't PDA. Of course, my job here is not to doubt anyone's identity nor to discourage any exploration of this. I encourage you to explore. Those who are suffering most will be the undiagnosed autistic people, PDA profile or not, who struggle with negative self-talk and struggle with their environments. Those are the folks that I hope this video reaches. But if one identifies as PDA or PDA profile, and to an extent I do, those who know me could see this video and relate this to me, and I wouldn't blame them if they did. But it's important to put PDA in perspective. And maybe my struggles with PDA profile definition are a result of my autistic black and white thinking. Mm-hmm. I much prefer the label pervasive drive for autonomy.
Say goodbye to old, costly cable TV once and for all. This revolutionary invention gives you access.
But the pervasive drive for autonomy is not a diagnosis, and until it's made a diagnosis, it's not going to mean anything. It's just how
and
it
not
is.
Just because it's removed the word pathological. Mm-hmm. I've worked for myself for the last 20 years and prefer to work independently on pretty much everything. The drive, the compulsion for autonomy, for freedom, to choose our own fate, I think is a much better model and explains more than pathological demand avoidance. And it's not pathological in this way, it's honourable, and it's about the drive to be independent, and not the implication of do what you're told
or rebellion
that we commonly hear from the term demand avoidance. Mm-hmm. It's a psychological, technical term, demand avoidance, but commonly misapplied to a belligerent child. Maybe they just want to be autonomous and independent. Maybe they just want to run around the playground flapping their hands on their own. Leave them be. Don't force them into those interactions just because they're avoiding them. They're not avoiding them. They're being autonomous. However you slice it, the symptoms of PDA are real, although this video focuses on the PDA label itself and the explanations rather than how to deal with this thing that we call demand avoidance. Now, I hope I've explained just a few reasons why autistic people might be seen to avoid demands, and hopefully you can see that it's not laziness, but actually a complex collection of sensory, motor, executive functioning, and social and processing difficulties that drive the strong emotions that we attribute to PDA. Now, if you think that you're PDA, here's a video that you really shouldn't watch next. Don't like this video, don't stim the notification bell. Oh, and congratulations to Mia,